By 1950, the United Nations forces had landed in South Korea and mounted a powerful offensive that drove the previously victorious North Korean army across the country, advancing north to lead the enemy to final defeat in the Korean War. However, seeing the Americans approach the Chinese border on the Yalu River, Mao Zedong ordered his vast army to invade North Korea and block its advance, leaving the world stunned by encircling the entire US Tenth Corps in the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. After a hard and freezing 17 days of combat, the American troops managed to break the siege at great cost, narrowly avoiding a shameful defeat. The event sounded alarm bells at the White House, where President Harry Truman had literally run out of reserves to send in support of the besieged troops, causing him to declare a national emergency for military draft. The draft for military service, which had been approved by Congress just 2 years earlier, had by then called up just a few thousand men into the military. But with the emergency declared by Truman, that number jumped to over 1.5 million over the next 3 years. And with tensions with the Soviets rising in Europe, it continued in high numbers even after the Korean conflict ended in 1953. And it was in that year, on January 19, just 11 days after turning 18 years old, that a young man from Memphis, Tennessee, named Elvis Aaron Presley, filled out his military enlistment form. A few months later, Presley walked into a local recording studio with a few dollars in hand to record 2 songs on an album he would give as a gift to his mother. The studio's owners were impressed with the young man's voice, starting a meteoric rise that led Elvis Presley to national fame in the following year. Not only did the young artist's voice stand out, but also the unprecedented way in which he moved on stage, creating for the first time a musical frenzy directly into the younger audiences. Presley reached the top of the most played song lists on radio in several countries, and quickly Hollywood also hired him to star in a series of musical films. His stars seemed to find no bounds, and by the age of 20 he was already called the king of rock and roll. But on January 8, 1956, at the age of 21, Elvis Presley was suddenly able to be called up for military service. His manager, the shrewd Colonel Tom Parker, anticipated the possibility and wrote to the Pentagon asking what the generals were planning for his most valued client. Parker was aware that the military could offer Presley the opportunity to join the Special Service, which used to frame many famous service-age performers, sparing them the common military service by requiring them only to perform on stage for troops stationed around the world. Parker knew, however, that if Elvis made use of his fame to be integrated into the Special Service, he would suffer even more retaliation from conservative groups that already repudiated his dancing and his influence on the American youth, and he was determined to prevent that. In fact, not only the Army, but also the Navy and the Air Force made offers to the businessman, each creating a special framing just to be able to count on Elvis in their ranks. But in the end, the singer himself rejected all these alternatives, deciding that he would serve like a common soldier. On January 4, 1957, Presley presented himself at the Kennedy Veterans Hospital in Memphis to undergo pre-selection physical exams, and in enviable health, 4 days later he was declared physically fit for military service, with a probable call-up in the next 8 months. While his fans were saddened by the news, his detractors cheered effusively at the possibility of alienating him from the youth. Elvis Presley's call-up notice arrived on December 16, giving the presentation date as January 20, 1958. However, he had signed a contract with Paramount Pictures and was about to begin filming the new movie King Creole, and a production interruption would cause the studio millionaire losses. As a result, Presley asked the Army for an extension of the presentation deadline, which was eventually pushed back by 2 months. 2 weeks after the filming ended, Elvis Presley woke up early on Monday, March 24, 1958, and reported shortly after 6:30 a.m. to the Memphis Recruiting Board, where he performed a final physical exam and took his oath, making him the recruit number 533-10761. After saying goodbye to family and friends, he boarded a military bus with 12 other colleagues to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. Parker had made sure that the press covered every step of Elvis's military service, and arriving in Arkansas was no different. Dozens of cameras captured Presley's haircut. When he saw the first tufts on the floor, he joked, "Hair, Today you have it, tomorrow you don't. Staying in just 4 days at Fort Chaffee, Presley was quickly transferred to Fort Hood, Texas, one of the largest training centers for American armored cavalry. There, he was integrated into the Alpha Company of the 1st Medium Tank Battalion of the 2nd Armored Division Hell on Wheels, one of the United States' pioneering large tank units, which had previously been commanded by the iconic General George Patton. Even though he was at the time the biggest star on the national music scene, Private Presley was recognized for his simplicity and good relationship with his fellow servicemen, as well as for his outstanding accuracy in shooting, which quickly earned him the marksmanship insignia. Trained as a crew member of M48 Patton tanks, he later revealed to be immensely fond of the obstacle courses he had to overcome aboard the armored vehicles, and in the month of June he had his first leave, in which he entered an intensive period of recording in a few days, part of his manager's strategy to accumulate unreleased material that he could release gradually while he was in the army. With all the plans in place, however, tragedy would soon hit Elvis Presley. In early August, his mother, Gladys Presley, who had a serious history of alcoholism, suddenly became ill and was hospitalized in Memphis. On the 11th, Elvis requested an emergency leave to see her, leaving the next day. Gladys, however, died on August 14 of heart failure caused by cirrhosis. Elvis was extremely devoted to his mother and broke down in tears throughout the funeral. Extremely deconstructed, he returned to Fort Hood on the 18th, and a few days later received his assignment to serve with the 1st Medium Tank Battalion of the 32nd Armored Regiment, part of the 3rd Armored Division Spearhead, then stationed in Friedberg, West Germany. Arriving at the New York docks on September 22nd, Elvis boarded the transport ship USS General George Randall, and under the eyes of the media and thousands of fans, said goodbye to the United States, departing to Europe. Private Elvis Presley was about to be thrown into the nerve center of the Cold War tensions. The US 3rd Armored Division was the main unit responsible for protecting the important industrial and financial center of Frankfurt against a Soviet invasion, manning the entrances to the vital Fulda Gap. Located close to the demarcation line between West and East Germany, the city of Fulda was at the bottom of a valley that divided the Vogelsberg Mountains, making it the most vulnerable point for the outbreak of an eventual World War III. Elvis and his contingent arrived in Germany on October 1st, and he was immediately made a jeep driver for Captain Russell, commander of Delta Company, but this would prove to be a short-lived post, as the captain quickly became irritated by the constant presence of curious civilians wherever he went. So Russell transferred Presley to a heavy duty. He would drive Sergeant Ira Jones, commander of a Charlie Company reconnaissance platoon. Presley began to integrate patrol missions in the border areas with the Soviet sector, and despite the hardships of winter, he refused any type of differential treatment on the part of Sergeant Jones. I lived the experience to the full. I slept in the snow, I ate rations desperately. But I suppose the most impressive thing is that I managed to overcome everything. I tried to play the game honestly, like everyone else, and made a lot of friends I wouldn't have made any other way. Overall, it's been a great experience. His presence at the East German border, however, was far from a secret, and his influence even behind the Iron Curtain already preoccupied the communist leadership. Willi Stoph, East Germany's defense minister, said that Elvis Presley's rock and roll is a way to seduce the youth into atomic war. Walter Ulbricht, party secretary, admitted that it's not enough to just reject capitalist decay with words. To eliminate the influence of someone like Presley, we have to offer something better. Demonstrations by Elvis Presley fans were recorded in Dresden and 13 other East German cities in 1959, and the Leipzig police acted violently against one such demonstration, arresting 15 people with sentences ranging from 6 months to 4.5 years in prison. On the western side, a young American officer was also aware of the civil commotion at the maneuvers, and was curious to know the culprit. Second Lieutenant Colin Powell commanded a platoon of the 48th Infantry Regiment, and met Presley during exercises in a forest north of Frankfurt. When I first met him, he was out in the field, as dirty and tired as any of the other soldiers, and he was rightly recognized for being entirely professional. I was driving by my jeep and someone said, "There he is." When I got out of my jeep and walked towards him, he saluted me and stood stiffly to attention. and I was amazed at how he looked just like an ordinary soldier. I thought, this is Elvis Presley, but here he is in a forest, just like a soldier doing his duty. Despite bringing his family to Germany and being able to sleep most nights in a house he rented close to the base, Elvis was also considered a valued comrade by his colleagues. He financed the construction of a new cafeteria, bought television sets for the barracks, and gave all his colleagues an extra set of fatigues. And his time as a soldier would not be marked only by the rigor with which he carried out his missions. In June 1959, shortly after being promoted to specialist fourth class, he was given a 15-day leave of absence and invited 3 colleagues to an intense marathon of parties, sponsored by him at the cost of $15,000. In a brewery in Munich, one of his colleagues, Rex Mansfield, got into a fight and was attacked by a German, and seeing the scene, Elvis defended his friend and knocked out the man, who fell to the ground. Leaving Munich, the friends went to Paris, where Presley brought the entire group of topless dancers from a club to their hotel. His residence was also a constant venue for meetings and amateur recordings, and it was in one of those occasions that Elvis met Priscilla Beaulieu, then 14 years old, the daughter of an Air Force officer, who 7 years later would become his wife. After another winter of patrol operations, on January 20, 1960, Elvis Presley was promoted to sergeant, and with the end of his 2 years of mandatory service approaching, he held a press conference on March 1st. I was in a funny position, you know. There was no way around it. People expected me to mess up, to do silly things one way or another. They thought I wouldn't make it, but I was determined to break any boundaries to prove otherwise, not just to those people, but mainly to myself. The next day, Presley said goodbye to Germany for good and flew back to the United States, arriving at McGuire Air Force Base amid a huge crowd on March 3rd, being awarded the Army Good Conduct Medal, and moving into the reserve with honors 2 days later. Facing his military service as an ordinary soldier, Elvis had returned home to a warm welcome from his fans, as well as a new and positive approval from social groups that once despised him. His time in the army became the subject of his next film, GI Blues, kicking off a new phase in the prolific career of the King of Rock and Roll.